The Little Ice Age marks a significant period in our planet's recent climate history. It was a period of regional cooling, impacting various parts of the globe in different ways. The cooling was especially pronounced in the North Atlantic region, leaving a lasting mark on its environment and the communities that called it home. It wasn't a true ice age in the geological sense, no vast ice sheets covering continents, but winters grew noticeably longer, more severe and harsher than what people were accustomed to. The change in weather patterns was undeniable. Summers, which were typically relied upon for warmth and growth, turned cool and wet, significantly disrupting established agricultural and societal patterns that had been in place for generations. The era spanned roughly from 1300 to 1850, a period of over 5 centuries, but the cold wasn't constant or uniform throughout this extended time frame. The climate was anything but stable. There were periods of intense cold spells where temperatures plummeted to extreme lows, interspersed with brief warm-ups that offered temporary respite, with different regions across the globe affected in unique and varying ways, experiencing the effects of the Little Ice Age with different intensities. Average global temperatures dropped by just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, a seemingly small change, but the impact of this seemingly minor shift in temperature was dramatic and far-reaching, triggering a cascade of environmental and societal consequences. European mountain glaciers, which had remained relatively stable for centuries, began to advance, slowly but surely swallowing valuable farmland and even entire villages that lay in their path. Sea ice increased significantly, expanding its reach, and rivers, even major ones like the Thames in England, froze over completely, an event that was previously unheard of, fundamentally changing daily life for those who depended on these waterways for transportation and commerce. The climate became increasingly unpredictable, presenting unprecedented challenges to communities and testing their ability to adapt and survive. Scientists now believe that the Little Ice Age was likely triggered by a combination of factors, including reduced solar activity, most notably periods of prolonged solar minimums such as the Maunder minimum, when sunspot activity was significantly reduced. In addition, a series of volcanic eruptions also played a significant role in exacerbating the cooling trend, sending massive amounts of ash and aerosols high into the atmosphere, effectively blocking sunlight and reducing the amount of solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface. Furthermore, shifts in ocean currents, those vast rivers of water that circulate around the globe, may have also contributed to further cooling the North Atlantic region and disrupting established weather patterns. These natural forces, acting in concert, combined to significantly lower temperatures across the northern hemisphere and reshape societies in profound ways. People faced unprecedented new hardships as the environment around them underwent dramatic and often unpredictable changes. The Little Ice Age, therefore, stands as a powerful testament to human resilience and adaptation in the face of significant environmental challenges. It forced communities to fundamentally rethink how they lived, how they worked, and how they interacted with the natural world around them. The era's challenges would ripple through every aspect of life, leaving no stone unturned and impacting every facet of human existence. From food production and agricultural practices to political structures and governance, nothing was untouched by the pervasive influence of this period of climatic change. The story of the Little Ice Age is ultimately one of survival, adaptation, and profound transformation in the face of adversity. Its legacy still echoes in our modern understanding of climate dynamics, societal resilience, and the intricate relationship between humanity and the environment. The colder climate hit agriculture hard, impacting crop yields and the livelihoods of countless farmers. The growing seasons became unpredictable, and the delicate balance of nature was disrupted. Growing seasons shrank and crops often failed, leading to widespread food shortages and economic hardship. The ability to reliably produce food became a major concern for communities across the affected regions. Unexpected frosts and heavy rains destroyed harvests, wiping out months of hard work in a matter of days. These extreme weather events became more frequent and intense, posing a constant threat to agricultural production, leaving farmers scrambling to salvage what they could and find new ways to adapt to the changing conditions. Many faced financial ruin and were forced to abandon their farms. Traditional farming methods, passed down through generations no longer worked in the face of the altered climate. Farmers had to experiment with new techniques and strategies to try and overcome the challenges they faced. Food production became a daily struggle, with communities constantly worried about having enough to eat. Empty granaries and dwindling supplies became a common sight, highlighting the severity of the crisis. Alpine glaciers advanced, sometimes swallowing entire villages and forever altering the landscape. The relentless march of the ice served as a stark reminder of the power of nature. Tree lines receded as the cold pushed vegetation to lower altitudes, changing the composition of forests and ecosystems. And rivers like the Thames froze, solid enough to support entire communities, giving rise to famous frost fairs, which became a unique part of the era's culture. These fairs offered a temporary escape from the hardships of winter. Fish populations shifted, seeking warmer waters, forcing coastal communities to adapt their fishing practices and find new sources of sustenance. Malnutrition spread as food grew scarce, weakening the population and making them more susceptible to illness. The lack of essential nutrients had a devastating impact on public health, making people more vulnerable to disease, as their immune systems were compromised by the lack of food. Epidemics often followed famine, compounding the misery and decimating already weakened populations. The combination of hunger and disease created a deadly cycle. Staying warm and dry became a constant challenge, requiring ingenuity and resourcefulness. People spent much of their time and energy simply trying to stay alive. Mortality rates rose, especially among the young and elderly, who were most vulnerable to the harsh conditions. The increased death toll was a tragic consequence of the climate crisis. The demand for firewood soared as people desperately sought ways to heat their homes and stay warm during the long, cold winters, leading to widespread deforestation, as forests were cleared to provide fuel for heating and cooking. This deforestation had further environmental consequences, exacerbating the climate crisis. People bundled up in heavier clothing, layering garments to protect themselves from the biting cold, and changed their homes to keep out the cold, using materials like straw and mud to insulate walls and roofs. Communities had to innovate just to survive winter, developing new technologies and strategies for heating, food storage, and transportation. Social life adapted, with people spending more time indoors and relying on each other for support and companionship. Fairs on frozen rivers became new traditions, offering a brief respite from the hardships of winter and a chance to celebrate community. The struggle for food and warmth shaped daily routines, dictating how people spent their time and energy. Even small climate shifts could mean disaster for entire regions, leading to widespread famine, disease, and social unrest. The Little Ice Age forced people to rethink how they lived, challenging their assumptions about the natural world and their place within it. Every winter was a test of endurance, pushing people to their limits and demanding resilience in the face of adversity. The era's hardships left a mark on culture and society, shaping traditions, beliefs, and social structures for generations to come. Survival depended on creativity and resilience, highlighting the remarkable capacity of humans to adapt and overcome even the most challenging circumstances. The Little Ice Age brought recurring food shortages and hunger. Colder weather meant frequent crop failures, especially for grain, the staple food. When harvests failed, prices soared, and many couldn't afford to eat. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 devastated northern Europe, killing millions. Years of cold, wet weather ruined crops and left entire regions starving. Famine became a grim, recurring feature of life. Even a slight temperature drop could spell disaster. Governments struggled to provide relief. Food storage and transport were primitive. Desperate people rioted, and some resorted to eating roots or bark. Families sometimes abandoned children they couldn't feed. Migration increased as people searched for food. Social instability grew. Riots, violence, and unrest became common. The fabric of society was stretched to its limits. Hunger weakened bodies, making disease outbreaks more deadly. Communities faced impossible choices just to survive. The memory of famine haunted generations. Food insecurity shaped politics and daily life. The Little Ice Age exposed the fragility of medieval society. It was a time when survival was never guaranteed. The era's famines left scars that lasted for centuries. Famine and hardship became grim realities across Europe. The changing climate brought with it unpredictable weather patterns, leading to widespread crop failures. Granaries, once overflowing with grain, stood empty, a stark symbol of the growing crisis. This scarcity of food fueled social unrest across Europe. People were hungry, desperate, and increasingly angry at the established order. Desperation led to anger, a simmering resentment that threatened to boil over. The faces of the peasants reflected their suffering, their clenched fists a sign of their growing defiance. As conditions worsened, peasant revolts erupted across the countryside. Armed with pitchforks and torches, they rose up against their lords, demanding relief from their suffering. These uprisings, however, were often brutally crushed by the ruling elite, who were determined to maintain their power and privilege. The suppression of these revolts only served to deepen the divide between the rich and the poor. Urban protests over food prices became increasingly common. These bread riots shook cities, revealing deep discontent and a growing sense of injustice among the urban population. Traditional authorities lost credibility in the eyes of the people. They were seen as ineffective and uncaring as they failed to prevent the widespread suffering. Kings and nobles were blamed for the food shortages and the general sense of insecurity that gripped the land. The empty food stores became a symbol of their perceived failure. The political landscape grew volatile, with factions vying for power amidst the chaos. Power shifted as old alliances crumbled and new challenges emerged, threatening the very foundations of medieval society. Scarcity intensified competition for land as people fought over dwindling resources. This included fuel and fishing rights, all essential for survival. Local disputes over resources became increasingly common as communities struggled to survive. These disputes often turned violent as desperation fueled conflict. Communities fought to defend their land and their livelihoods. They were determined to protect what little they had from outsiders. In times of crisis, people searched for explanations, often turning to superstition and the supernatural. In this environment, superstition and fear flourished, gripping communities in their icy embrace. Witch hunts surged, fueled by paranoia and religious fervor. Marginalized groups were scapegoated for the misfortunes of the community. They were blamed for bad weather and crop failures, even though they had no control over these events. The era's anxiety was palpable, etched on the faces of the people. This anxiety found targets in the vulnerable members of society who were often persecuted without mercy. Social bonds frayed under the pressure of these events. As trust in institutions eroded, society began to unravel. The Little Ice Age tested the resilience of communities. It tested the limits of order and authority, pushing them to the breaking point. Resource scarcity became the defining characteristic of the age. This scarcity bred conflict at every level of society. From local disputes to large-scale wars, violence and feuds became endemic, poisoning relationships between individuals and communities. Sadly, violence became part of daily life for many. The search for someone to blame was a constant refrain. This reflected a deep sense of uncertainty about the future. The strains of the era were immense, testing the limits of human endurance. These strains reshaped European society in profound and lasting ways. Power shifted as the old order crumbled. Old structures faltered, unable to cope with the challenges of the time. The Little Ice Age was as much a social crisis as it was a climatic one, leaving an indelible mark on the European psyche. It was a time of immense hardship, but also a period of profound transformation. Climate stress didn't cause wars, but it made them more likely and more brutal. Scarce resources pushed nations toward conflict, seeking land and food. Rulers exploited weakness, and desperate populations swelled armies. War became a means of survival for many. Climate acted as a threat multiplier, worsening existing tensions. The human cost of war soared as environmental pressures mounted. The Little Ice Age turned Europe into a more dangerous place. The 30 Years' War coincided with a particularly cold phase of the Little Ice Age. Armies battled not just each other, but brutal winters and unpredictable weather. Frozen roads and rivers crippled supply lines and troop movements. Soldiers suffered from exposure, disease and hunger. Civilians faced disaster as war and climate combined. Even the best armies, like the Swedes under Gustavus Adolphus, struggled in the cold. Winter often decided the outcome of battles, or prolonged the war. The English Civil War unfolded during another cold phase of the Little Ice Age. Harsh winters and failed harvests fueled economic and political unrest. Food shortages and high prices deepened public anger. Military campaigns were hampered by rain, snow, and frost. Other European conflicts faced similar challenges. The general crisis of the 17th century was shaped by climate stress. The Little Ice Age cast a long, cold shadow over Europe's wars and revolutions. The late 18th century saw another cold snap, worsened by the Laki eruption in Iceland. Volcanic ash triggered a volcanic winter, devastating European agriculture. France suffered brutal winters and failed harvests before the revolution. Bread shortages and soaring prices fueled riots and the Great Fear. The government's failure to respond deepened resentment. The Third Estate bore the brunt while elites remained insulated. Climate stress helped ignite revolutionary fervor. The icy grip of the Little Ice Age was a catalyst for change. The Little Ice Age forced Europe to adapt or perish. New crops like potatoes and maize gained importance for their resilience. Farming techniques and land use evolved to improve food security. Armies adapted to harsh winters, spurring military innovation. The era encouraged scientific thinking and the search for rational explanations. The scientific revolution and enlightenment found fertile ground in crisis. Nations that adapted best gained power and influence. The Little Ice Age profoundly shaped modern Europe,